The dust motes danced in the slanted morning light, each one a tiny glittering world above the cold, unforgiving marble of the Sterling Estate's main hall. Elena moved through the vast silence, her worn woolen dress whispering against the floor as she ran a cloth over the surface of a mahogany table. The sheer scale of the place was a constant, oppressive weight. Towering portraits of stern-faced ancestors in gilded frames watched her every move, their eyes seeming to follow the progress of the lowly maid who dared to touch their polished world. Her arms ached with a familiar burn, a testament to the endless halls and countless rooms that demanded her attention. Yet, within her, a quieter fire burned, a longing for the smell of old paper and ink, for the world contained within books, an education she could only dream of. Those dreams, however, were secondary, crushed under the practical weight of the coins she carefully counted each week. Most were sent home to her ailing mother, the remainder a meager buffer against the constant dread of a new doctor's bill or a prescription she couldn't afford. Her resilience was not a grand gesture, but a quiet, daily transaction of dignity for survival. Reaching for a delicate porcelain vase on the mantelpiece, her fingers, numb with cold and fatigue, betrayed her. The vase slipped, a heart-stopping second of weightlessness before it shattered on the hearth with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet room. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, not just in fear of the scolding to come, but in a sharp, surprising pang of grief. The vase had been beautiful, a piece of art with swirls of cobalt blue and milky white. Its destruction felt like a small, violent crime against beauty itself, and the cost of it, a sum that could have fed her mother for a month, hung in the air amidst the fragments. The stern housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, materialized as if summoned by the sound, her lips a thin, disapproving line. "Clumsy girl, do you have any idea what that was worth? It will be docked from your wages, of course." Elena did not grovel. She straightened her shoulders, her gaze lowered not in shame but in a quiet acceptance of the injustice. "Yes, Mrs. Higgins," she said, her voice steady. "I am truly sorry." She knelt, carefully gathering the sharp pieces into her apron, her movements deliberate and patient. The housekeeper watched for a moment longer, a flicker of something akin to frustration crossing her face at Elena's unbroken calm, before turning on her heel with a dismissive sniff. Alone again with the shattered porcelain, Elena's patience was not meekness. It was the armor of someone who had long learned that some storms could only be endured. The afternoon sun was a welcome warmth on Elena's back after the chill of the mansion's interior. Kneeling in a secluded corner of the estate's vast gardens, she tended to a bed of late-blooming roses, the rich scent of damp earth and petals a balm to her spirit. Her hands, still faintly aching from scrubbing floors, worked with a gentle precision as she cleared away weeds. This was her stolen half-hour, a precious sliver of time between her morning duties and the evening's preparations. From the pocket of her simple work dress, she pulled a small, well-worn book of poetry, its pages soft as cloth. It was her secret treasure, a portal to a world far removed from dust and marble. She was so engrossed in a verse about distant shores and wild seas that she did not hear the soft crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. A shadow fell across the page. "That's an unusual choice for a garden break," a man's voice remarked not unkindly. Startled, Elena looked up, shielding her eyes against the sun. The man standing before her was tall and lean, dressed not in the formal attire of the house's residents or guests, but in sturdy trousers and a simple linen shirt, its sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He had the confident bearing of someone who belonged here, yet his appearance was entirely unassuming. His hair was ruffled by the breeze, and his gaze was direct, curious, and held none of the habitual condescension she was used to. Flustered, she closed the book and made to stand, assuming he was a groundskeeper or perhaps a visiting tradesman. I was just taking a moment, sir. I'll return to my work." "Please don't get up on my account," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I was enjoying my walk and saw you reading. I'm afraid I'm guilty of eavesdropping on your literary escape." A faint, easy smile touched his lips. "Do you find solace in Tennyson?" Elena hesitated, surprised he had recognized the poet from a fleeting glance. She looked at him more carefully. His hands, though clean, looked capable, and his tan suggested time spent outdoors. Yet, his accent was refined, his observation sharp. I find his words have a certain strength, she replied cautiously, her initial wariness giving way to a spark of intellectual interest. A resilience. It's comforting. Resilience, he repeated, his smile deepening. He gestured to the stone bench nearby. May I? At her nod, he sat, stretching his long legs out before him. Most people speak of the romance or the drama in his work. You see the backbone. That's a far more interesting perspective. What followed was not an interrogation, but a conversation. He asked her what else she read, and Elena, disarmed by his genuine curiosity, spoke of dog-eared novels borrowed from the village library and histories she saved pennies to buy. She spoke not with the obsequiousness of a servant, but with the passion of a scholar denied a university. She offered opinions on character motivations and historical causes, her wit emerging not as sharp retort, but as insightful analysis. She made him laugh with a clever observation about a famously tedious politician in a book they had both read. He in turn spoke of books with an enthusiasm that was refreshingly devoid of pretension. He listened to her, his head tilted, as if her thoughts were as valuable as any he might hear in a London salon. The invisible wall of class that structured every moment of her life within the estate seemed, for these few minutes, to have vanished. The formality of this place can be stifling, don't you think? He said, gesturing vaguely toward the looming mansion. All these rules about who one can talk to and how. He stood abruptly, his energy infectious. I find a good walk is the best cure for it. Would you care to join me? There's a path through the oak grove I'd like to see. The invitation was so casual, so devoid of the calculated risk it represented for her, that it took Elena's breath away. To be seen walking with a man, even an unassuming one, on the grounds would be cause for dismissal. Yet the simple human connection, the thrill of a conversation that engaged her mind, was a temptation she had never known. She looked into his eyes, which held only a frank and open interest, and made a decision that felt both reckless and utterly right. A walk would be very pleasant, she said, rising and smoothing her simple dress. As they started down the path, the sun dappling through the leaves, Alexander Sterling, who had not offered his name, and whom she still believed to be a groundsman or a distant poor relation, felt a jolt of something entirely new. It wasn't pity or condescending curiosity. It was the striking, undeniable realization that he had just met the most fascinating person on the entire estate. The oak grove became their sanctuary. In the weeks that followed their first encounter, Elena and Alexander developed a careful, secret rhythm. Their meetings were brief, stolen moments tucked into the margins of the day, a few minutes at dawn when the mist still clung to the grass, or a half hour in the twilight when the shadows grew long and forgiving. Alexander, whom Elena now knew by his true name and title, insisted on the secrecy not for his own reputation, but for hers. The vipers in that house would sink their fangs into you without a second thought if they knew, he'd said, his voice heavy with a disdain that felt personal. Their courtship was conducted largely through letters. A folded note tucked beneath a specific loose stone by the greenhouse, a book left on the garden bench with a page delicately dog-eared to mark a passage he wanted her to read. His handwriting was bold and slanted, a reflection of a mind that chafed against constraints. In his letters he confided in her, and his disdain for his family's elitism was given sharp, specific form. I sat through a dinner last night. One letter began, where my uncle spent 40 minutes lamenting the decline of good breeding because a newly wealthy industrialist's daughter used the wrong fork for her fish. Meanwhile, the man who built his fortune employs hundreds, provides homes, sends his children to school. But his daughter's fork is the true tragedy. They live in a museum, Elena, and they worship empty labels. Another time he shared an anecdote from his childhood. When I was 10, I befriended the son of the head groom. We'd build forts in the hayloft. My mother found out and forbade me from seeing him, saying he was not our sort of people. I asked her what our sort was. She couldn't give me an answer beyond our name and bank balance. I sneaked out to see him anyway. It was my first act of rebellion. Elena, in her carefully penned replies, shared her own world. She wrote not of self-pity but of dreams painted in vivid colors. She described the small lending library in her village, a place of holy quiet, and her dream of one day walking into a university library, breathing in the scent of 1,000,000 books. She wrote of her mother's quiet courage in the face of illness, a different kind of strength than the sterling wealth could ever command. They discovered a shared value system built on a foundation of merit, kindness, and a profound belief that a person's worth was etched into their character, not their pedigree. One evening, as the last of the sun set the western sky ablaze, they met by the old stone fountain at the grove's heart. The air was warm and carried the scent of jasmine. Alexander was uncharacteristically quiet, his usual easy confidence replaced by a nervous intensity. "Elena," he began, taking both her hands in his. His hands were warm and she could feel a slight tremor in them. "This secrecy, it's a lie. A necessary one, perhaps, but a lie all the same. What we have found in these letters, in these talks, it's the most real thing I've ever known. They live in a museum, but you are life itself." He dropped to one knee on the soft moss. Elena's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I know the world will call me a fool. My family will see it as a betrayal. They will try to tear us apart, to make you feel you do not belong. But you belong with me." He looked up at her, his eyes blazing with a conviction that swept away all her doubts. "Elena, marry me, not in secret but openly. Let me stand beside you against all of it. It will be the hardest thing either of us has ever done, but I cannot imagine my life any other way." The proposal was not a fairy tale fantasy, it was a battle cry. It acknowledged the immense social chasm they would have to cross together, the certain war they would ignite. But in his eyes, she saw not just romance, but a partnership forged in intellectual respect and a shared defiance of a hollow world. The joy that surged through her was fierce and bright, tempered by the sobering understanding of the challenge ahead. "Yes," she whispered, the word feeling both fragile and monumental. "Yes, Alexander, I will." The wedding was not held on the Sterling estate, a fact for which Elena was profoundly grateful. Instead, they were married in the small, stone-built village church she had attended with her mother since childhood. Sunlight streamed through the simple stained-glass window, casting pools of jeweled light on the worn flagstones. The air smelled of beeswax and hymnals, a familiar, comforting scent. Her mother, frail but radiant, sat in the front pew, her eyes glistening with tears that were entirely joyful. There were no towering portraits here, no cold marble, only a handful of Elena's friends from the village and a few of Alexander's more progressive acquaintances from the city, who had been sworn to discretion. Alexander stood beside her, his hand warm and steady around hers. He had forgone the formal morning suit expected of a man of his standing, choosing instead a well-tailored but simple dark suit. It was a small, deliberate rebellion that Elena cherished. The vicar's words echoed in the humble space, binding them together not with the pomp of dynasty, but with the quiet solemnity of a promise. For those brief minutes, surrounded by genuine love, the shadow of the Sterling name receded. The joy was real, a bright, clear flame kindled from their secret conversations and shared defiance. But the shadow was waiting for them on the church steps. Beatrice Sterling had arrived in a sleek, silent motor car, a stark anachronism against the village green. She was a vision of calculated elegance in dove-gray silk, her smile a thin, precise line. As the small crowd spilled out into the sunshine, she approached the newlyweds. "Alexander," she said, her voice cool as a winter stream. She offered her cheek for a kiss, which he gave stiffly. Then her gaze, sharp and assessing, turned to Elena. And Elena, what a brave little ceremony. So quaint. She took Elena's hand, her grip like ice despite the warm day. I must congratulate you on your astonishing ascent. It takes a particular kind of courage, my dear, to leap so far so fast. I do hope you land on your feet." The words were congratulations, but each one was a tiny, polished dart. They were not about joy or love, but about risk, social climbing, and the immense height from which she could fall. The journey back to the Sterling mansion was a silent transition from one world to another. Elena's simple suitcase, containing her few precious belongings, looked absurdly small in the boot of the car. With each mile, the weight of her new reality settled upon her. The towering iron gates swung open and the house rose before them, no longer just her place of work but her home, a word that felt utterly foreign in this context. Her new room was not a room but a suite, a cavernous space larger than her entire childhood home. A four-poster bed stood like an island in the center, its drapes of heavy velvet. A fireplace large enough to stand and dominated one wall, cold and empty. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of her own footsteps on the vast Persian rug. She unpacked her meager possessions, her books, a small porcelain figurine her mother had given her, her simple nightdress, and they seemed to disappear into the ornate drawers of the mahogany wardrobe, lost and insignificant. That evening a dinner was served not in the family's informal dining room, but in the grand hall. Elena, wearing one of the new dresses Alexander had insisted on buying, felt like a child playing dress-up. The footmen who had once been her colleagues moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, their eyes carefully averted. She tried to remember the etiquette from the books she had frantically studied, but every movement felt clumsy and observed. Beatrice presided over the table with a serene authority, discussing a recent opera season in Vienna with Alexander, a conversation into which Elena could not possibly interject. She was not openly criticized, merely rendered invisible, a spectator at the life she was now supposed to lead. The joy of the morning was still a warmth in her heart, but it was now encircled by a creeping chill, the first unmistakable frost of an impending betrayal. The grand dining hall of the Sterling mansion was a theater of silent judgment. Crystal glasses and heavy silverware gleamed under the light of 1,000 candles in the chandelier above, each flicker illuminating the vast, cold space. Elena sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, the intricate carvings digging into her spine. The dress she wore, a gift from Alexander, was of the finest silk, but it felt like a costume, its delicate fabric a poor shield against the subtle barbs of her new family. Beatrice presided from the head of the table with the serene authority of a queen, her every movement a lesson in effortless grace. To her right, Clara, Alexander's sister, watched Elena with the keen, unblinking interest of a cat observing a mouse. The undermining began not with shouts, but with silences. "Alexander, darling," Beatrice began, elegantly spearing a morsel of asparagus. "Lady Ashworth was telling me about the Duc de Champfort's collection of impressionist art. His eye is simply unparalleled. You remember the summer we spent at his chateau near Bordeaux, don't you?" Alexander, distracted by a letter from his business manager that had arrived just before dinner, gave a non-committal murmur. Clara picked up the thread seamlessly. "Oh, that summer. The gardens were divine. Do you recall the particular way they trained the wisteria? It was an art form in itself. One simply doesn't see that level of craftsmanship here." The conversation flowed smoothly between mother and daughter, a river of shared experiences, exclusive names, and unspoken codes from which Elena was entirely excluded. It was a dance she had not been taught the steps to. When she ventured a comment about a beautiful painting she had noticed in the library, comparing its use of light to a description in a novel she'd read, Clara offered a thin, condescending smile. "That old thing. It's a minor copy of a Dutch master, my dear. Quite sentimental, but of little real value. It's sweet that you noticed it." She then turned back to her mother. "Speaking of value, Mother, have you decided on the pieces for the autumn auction at Christie's?" Elena's comment was not corrected. It was gently dismissed, its very premise framed as naive. She felt her cheeks grow warm, the heat a stark contrast to the chill settling in her chest. She looked to Alexander for support, but his brow was furrowed, his mind clearly across an ocean on business matters. He was physically present but emotionally absent, a gulf already beginning to open between them. Later, in the overwhelming silence of her bedroom, Elena's anxiety began to manifest in tangible ways. Sleep became a fleeting visitor. She would lie awake for hours, staring at the ornate plasterwork on the ceiling, replaying every moment of the dinner, every slight, every nuanced phrase until they swelled into monstrous proofs of her own inadequacy. The lavish meals placed before her lost their taste. She would push the food around her plate, her stomach a tight knot of nerves. Determined to belong, to prove herself worthy of the name she now bore, she began to overcompensate. In the quiet hours of the morning, before the household stirred, she would sit by her window with a heavy book on etiquette, its pages filled with intricate diagrams of place settings and rules for precedence that felt like a foreign language. She practiced walking with a book balanced on her head, trying to mimic Clara's fluid, unhurried glide. She studied the family portraits in the gallery, attempting to decipher the aloof expressions, the posture of innate superiority. But the more she tried to contort herself to fit this new world, the more acutely she felt the disconnect. Her attempts felt like a performance, and a poor one at that. The confidence Alexander had admired in her, her quiet dignity, her sharp wit, began to recede, replaced by a gnawing self-consciousness. The mansion, once a place of arduous work, had become a gilded cage, and the first frost of isolation was crystallizing around her heart, cold and sharp. The joy of her wedding day felt like a dream remembered from another life, its warmth fading fast in the face of this new, chilling reality. The silence in the Sterling mansion had changed. It was no longer just the vast, empty quiet of great halls and uninhabited rooms. It had become a pregnant, watchful hush, thick with unspoken words. Elena felt it the moment she descended the grand staircase each morning, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the pressure drop before a storm. The footmen who had once offered her shy, sympathetic smiles now averted their eyes entirely. The junior maids, girls she had worked alongside just weeks before, would scatter like startled birds when she entered a room, their hurried curtsies a mask for their discomfort. The epicenter of this new chill was Clara. Jealousy was the engine of her malice, a bitter brew stirred from two potent sources, a protective, possessive fury over her brother's name, and a seething resentment that a girl from the scullery could ascend to a position she herself had to navigate through birthright and intricate social maneuvering. Clara's campaign was not waged in drawing rooms, but in the servants' hall, the kitchens, and the laundry, the places where Elena's past was a living memory. Elena first heard the whispers by accident. Seeking a moment of solace, she had slipped into the small, sunlit conservatory that overlooked the rose garden. The voices came from the other side of a dense trellis of jasmine, two young laundry maids taking their break. "Heard it from Mr. Hodges, the butler, who had it from Miss Clara herself," one girl was saying, her voice a conspiratorial murmur. "Says she had her sights set on the master from the first day. Broke that vase on purpose just to get his attention." "A gold digger, plain and simple," the other replied, a note of grim satisfaction in her tone. "All that quietness, just an act. Now she's got her feet under the table, you watch. She'll bleed him dry and be gone." The words struck Elena with the force of a physical blow. She leaned against the cold glass of the window pane, her legs suddenly weak. It was one thing to feel Beatrice's cold disapproval or Clara's subtle slights. It was another to have her character, her love for Alexander, twisted into something sordid and calculating. The resilience that had been her armor felt thin, brittle. She could not let it stand. The confrontation happened later that afternoon in the upstairs corridor outside Clara's private sitting room. Elena, her heart hammering against her ribs, waited until a footman had passed before stepping into Clara's path. "Clara, may I speak with you?" Elena's voice was quieter than she intended, betraying her nerves. Clara paused, her expression one of mild, bored inquiry. "Elena, you look pale. Is the country air not agreeing with you?" Elena ignored the barb. "I've heard there are rumors among the staff. Ugly rumors about my reasons for marrying Alexander." Clara's eyebrows arched in perfect feigned surprise. "Rumors? What a tiresome lot they are downstairs. Always gossiping. You shouldn't pay it any mind. She made to move past, a dismissive smile playing on her lips. These rumors, Elena pressed, forcing a steadiness into her tone. They seem to have a particular source. They sound like things you would say. Clara stopped, her smile turning slick and condescending. She looked Elena up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made Elena feel like an insect pinned to a board. "My dear Elena," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "What a vivid imagination you have. It must be so difficult coming from your background to adjust to the realities of your new position. You're bound to feel a little paranoid. It's only natural." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "But to accuse me of spreading tales? That's not only ungrateful, it's rather common. I'd be careful about making such accusations. They make you look desperate." The denial was absolute, delivered with such polished contempt that it left Elena utterly powerless. Any further argument would only prove Clara's point, that she was hysterical, unstable, unfit. Clara swept away down the corridor, the whisper of her silk gown a sound of finality. Elena stood alone, the confrontation having achieved nothing but to solidify her isolation. The whispers would not stop. If anything, they would now grow louder, fueled by her failed attempt to silence them. This was not a random bit of malice. It was a coordinated strike, the first clear move in a plan she was only beginning to discern. The goal was not just to make her uncomfortable. It was to isolate her, to erode her standing until she had no one to turn to, not even the staff. The family's cruel design was now in motion, and she was trapped at its very center. The change in Alexander was not sudden, but a gradual chilling, like the slow encroachment of winter. The financial crisis that had seized his overseas holdings, a complex web of shipping investments threatened by political instability, was a genuine and all-consuming fire. It was also a convenient one, a pre-existing flaw in his character that Beatrice and Clara expertly exploited. Alexander had always been a man who solved problems, who found his worth in action and control. The crisis provided a legitimate, urgent reason to retreat into the world of ledgers and telegraphs, a world where the messy, intangible problems of his new marriage did not exist. Elena watched the distance open like a crack in the earth. The man who had courted her with poetry and shared rebellion was replaced by a preoccupied stranger. He took his meals in his study, trays of barely touched food returning to the kitchen. When they did share a table, his mind was elsewhere. Elena would try to bridge the gap, her voice tentative in the vast dining room. "The roses in the East Garden are finally blooming," she offered one evening, her words sounding small and foolish against the clink of silver. "The crimson ones you admired last spring." Alexander looked up from his plate, his eyes focusing on her as if from a great distance. For a moment she saw a flicker of the man she married, a spark of recognition. But it was quickly extinguished. "Yes, the roses." "Very good," he murmured, before his gaze drifted back to a folded newspaper beside his plate, its headlines screaming of market panics. The conversation was over before it began. His physical presence became a ghostly thing. She would hear his footsteps late at night passing her door on the way to his own chamber, and the sound was lonelier than silence. The secret notes, the stolen walks, all were casualties of this new war he was fighting alone. Her love felt like a weight he no longer had the strength to carry. The thematic element of their love being tested by neglect was not a dramatic storm, but a slow, suffocating frost. It was in this vulnerable state that Beatrice found her. She came upon Elena one afternoon in the music room, standing listlessly by the grand piano, her hand resting on the cold, silent keys. "You look troubled, my dear," Beatrice said, her voice a smooth, practiced balm. She glided into the room, a vision of composed sympathy. "This business with Alexander, it is a terrible burden for a man of his standing. It requires his complete focus." She placed a cold, light hand on Elena's arm. "It is a wife's duty to be understanding, to be a source of stability, not a distraction." Elena flinched at the word distraction, but Beatrice's smile was unwavering. Of course, Elena replied softly. I only wish I could help. Oh, but you can, Beatrice purred, by being strong, by not adding to his burdens with emotional demands. She leaned closer, and her voice, though still gentle, took on a razor's edge. A man like Alexander, with his name and his responsibilities, needs a wife who is an unshakable asset, my dear. Not a project. The world he moves in is unforgiving. It does not tolerate weakness. You must ensure you are not seen as a liability. For his sake, of course. The words were a masterclass in veiled threat. They were draped in the language of concern and wifely duty, but their meaning was chillingly clear. Alexander's love was conditional on her ability to conform, to become the kind of wife his world required. Any failure, any sign of the common girl she had been, would be used as proof that she was a mistake. Beatrice's false comfort was a cage, its bars constructed from Elena's own love and fear. As Beatrice swept from the room, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume, Elena felt more alone than ever. The battle lines were being drawn not just in whispers and cold shoulders, but within the very fabric of her marriage, and she was losing ground with every passing, silent day. The silence in the West Wing library was a thick, dusty blanket, broken only by the soft tick of a long-case clock. Elena had sought refuge there, a habit born of desperation. It was the one room Beatrice seemed to disdain, filled with outdated ledgers and unread philosophical treatises rather than fashionable novels. Here, among the scent of old leather and slowly decaying paper, Elena could almost pretend she was back in the village lending library, a world away from the Sterling mansion's oppressive grandeur. For days, a gnawing anxiety had taken root in her chest, fed by Alexander's continued absence and the ever more pointed barbs from Clara. The feeling was a constant, low hum beneath her skin, a sense of being watched, measured, and found wanting. She was adrift, and the library's towering shelves felt like the only solid ground left. She was running a finger along a row of gilt-embossed spines when her eyes fell upon it. On Beatrice's small, delicate writing desk, usually meticulously tidy, a leather-bound journal lay slightly askew. It was a deep burgundy, its cover worn soft with age, and it was not closed. A single cream-colored page was visible, the edge curled as if the book had been snapped shut in haste. Elena's breath caught. To touch it would be a profound violation, an unforgivable sin in this house of unspoken rules. But the temptation was a physical pull. This was Beatrice's inner sanctum, the source of the cold calculations she felt directed at her every move. It was a mix of desperate curiosity and a need to understand the enemy that made her steps silent on the Persian rug. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the desk. She glanced toward the door, the library's emptiness suddenly feeling like a trap. With a trembling hand, she gently lifted the cover. The script was Beatrice's, elegant, looping, and ruthlessly precise. It was not a chronicle of daily life, but a ledger of influence and strategy. She saw mentions of social debts, analyses of character flaws in acquaintances, cold assessments of marital prospects for Clara. Then her own name leapt from the page, her blood ran cold. E remains a problem. A is stubbornly attached. Caesar is some sort of noble savage. A sentimental folly, but a persistent one. Direct opposition has failed. A more elegant solution is required. Elena's fingers trembled as she turned the page, the paper whispering secrets in the quiet room. Spoke with Henderson at the bank. Confirmed the fragility of A's new venture. The timing is providential. A significant, untraceable withdrawal, attributed to a new, grasping influence in his life. The narrative writes itself. The scandal would be irreparable. The evidence need not be robust, merely plausible to those who wish to believe it. A lesson in the cost of reaching above one's station. The words were not a blatant confession. They were a blueprint, couched in the language of strategy and necessity. But their meaning was unmistakable. Embezzlement. A frame-up. They were going to destroy not just her place in the family, but her very character, using Alexander's own business troubles as the backdrop. A wave of nausea washed over her. She felt exposed, hunted. The quiet library was no longer a refuge, but the scene of the crime she was meant to commit. Her first instinct was to run, to find Alexander and shake him until he saw the viper in their midst. But the memory of his distant, preoccupied face stopped her. He would dismiss it. He would call it the paranoia his mother had so cleverly preempted. To go to him now, with this, would only play into their hands, making her look exactly as they wanted her to look. Hysterical, accusatory, unstable. No. A fierce, cold determination solidified within her, quenching the panic. She would not be their passive victim. This diary was a weapon, and she would wield it. Moving quickly, her ears straining for any sound in the corridor, she found a sheaf of blank writing paper and a pen in the desk drawer. Her hand, though still shaking, moved with a desperate purpose. She began to copy the damning passages, her script a frantic mimicry of Beatrice's elegant hand. She did not transcribe every word, but the crucial ones. The mention of the banker Henderson, the plan for an untraceable withdrawal, the cold phrase, a lesson in the cost of reaching above one's station. Each word she copied was an act of rebellion, a silent scream against the gilded cage. When she was done, she carefully folded the copied pages and tucked them into the hidden pocket sewn into the seam of her dress. They felt like a shield, thin but potent. She smoothed the original diary page, closed the cover, and placed the journal back in its exact previous position. The room looked unchanged, but everything had changed. Elena stood for a moment, her hand pressed against the hidden papers. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But it was now joined by something else, a clear, sharp resolve. She was no longer just fighting for her marriage. She was fighting for her life, her name. The quiet maid had discovered the battlefield, and she was determined to fight back. The folded pages in the hidden pocket of Elena's dress felt like a lead weight, burning a hole against her thigh. For 2 days, she carried the copied evidence, waiting for a moment when Alexander might be approachable, a crack in the wall of his preoccupation. The opportunity came on a blustery evening. He had emerged from his study earlier than usual, his face etched with a fatigue that went beyond business worries. He stood by the drawing-room fireplace, staring into the flames as if seeking answers in the shifting coals. This was her chance. The Alexander she had fallen in love with was still in there, the man who valued truth over convenience. Taking a steadying breath, she approached him, the rustle of her skirts the only sound in the room. "Alexander?" she began, her voice softer than she intended. He turned, and for a fleeting second his eyes cleared, focusing on her. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Elena, forgive me. These damned shipping lanes." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I know you're under a great strain," she said, moving closer. "But there is something I must show you, something urgent." She withdrew the folded papers from her pocket, their creases sharp from how often she had unfolded and refolded them. Her hand trembled slightly as she held them out. "I found this in your mother's diary." The ghost of a smile vanished, replaced by a wary frown. He took the pages, his brow furrowing as he scanned her frantic script. Elena watched his face, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw his eyes move across the lines. A more elegant solution is required. A significant, untraceable withdrawal. The narrative writes itself. A lesson in the cost of reaching above one's station. She waited for the shock, the anger, the dawning horror. Instead, his expression hardened into something closed and impenetrable. He finished reading and let his hand fall to his side, the pages crinkling in his grip. "Elena," he said, his voice heavy with a weary exasperation that cut deeper than any shout. "What is this?" "It's what it appears to be," she insisted, her voice gaining strength from her conviction. "It's a plan, Alexander. Your mother and Clara, they intend to frame me. They're going to make it look like I stole from you to use your business troubles against us." He shook his head, a slow, dismissive gesture that felt like a physical blow. These are vague musings, out of context. My mother keeps notes on everything. She analyzes social strategies. It's a game to her." He stepped closer, his tone shifting to one of patronizing concern. Do you have any idea how this looks? Snooping in her private diary, copying her words? I had to. The words burst from her, fueled by a rising panic. They are isolating me, turning the staff against me, and you're never here. You don't see what they're doing. What I see, he interrupted, his voice rising to match hers, is my wife, who I brought into this house against all advice, becoming consumed by paranoia. I see you looking for shadows where there are none. The core of his character, his deep-seated, almost willful loyalty to his family name and his privileged inability to believe his own mother capable of such monstrous cruelty, was now working against her. My mother can be cold, Clara can be spiteful, but this? A criminal conspiracy? It's absurd, Elena. They are my family. And what am I? The question hung in the air, stark and devastating. Am I not your family? Or am I just the project your mother said you needed to worry about? The liability? The argument escalated, their voices echoing in the cavernous room. He accused her of letting her insecurities poison her judgment. She accused him of being blind, of choosing the comfortable lie of his upbringing over the difficult truth of his marriage. The fundamental issues of class and trust, once bridged by their secret courtship, now yawned like a chasm between them. I will not have this hysterical nonsense in my house, he finally roared, his face flushed with anger and stress. I have real problems to solve, problems that keep a roof over our heads. I suggest you find a way to occupy your time that doesn't involve inventing melodramatic plots. With that, he crumpled the copied pages in his fist and threw them into the fire. Elena watched, numb, as the edges blackened and curled, the evidence of her peril turning to ash in an instant. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, the slam of the door a final brutal punctuation to their fight. Elena stood alone in the sudden silence, the heat from the fireplace doing nothing to warm the ice that had formed in her veins. The crushing weight of his dismissal was more effective than any of Beatrice's schemes. He had not just rejected her evidence. He had rejected her perception, her sanity, her very worth. The last fragile thread of hope that he would see and protect her had been severed. As the last ember of the burned pages faded into darkness, a terrifying clarity settled over her. She was utterly alone. There would be no rescue, no champion from within these walls. The realization was a desolate emptiness, but from it, a new, steely resolve was born. If she was to survive, if she was to clear her name, she would have to do it alone. The time for pleading was over. The time for fighting had begun. The days following the confrontation were a study in silent warfare. Alexander's absence was now absolute, his meals taken exclusively in the city. Beatrice and Clara did not gloat. Their victory was too complete for that. Instead, they treated Elena with a new, chilling formality, as if she were a guest who had long overstayed her welcome. Their politeness was a blade sheathed in ice, each, "Good morning, Elena," a reminder of her isolation. The setup, when it came, was a masterpiece of plausible cruelty. It began with a gesture of apparent reconciliation. Beatrice summoned Elena to her private sitting room, a space usually forbidden. The air was thick with the scent of lilies. "Elena, my dear," Beatrice began, her voice dripping with a saccharine concern that set Elena's teeth on edge. "I cannot help but notice the strain you are under. This distance between you and Alexander, it grieves me." She sighed theatrically. "I may have been harsh. We are family, after all." She rose and went to an ornate lacquered box on her dressing table. From it she lifted a delicate silver bracelet, its surface intricately engraved with leaves and vines. "This was a gift from my own mother-in-law, a token of welcome. I want you to have it. A fresh start." Elena's every instinct screamed a warning. The bracelet was beautiful, but in Beatrice's hand it looked like a shackle. To refuse, however, would be to reject the olive branch, to confirm the paranoia Alexander had accused her of. She had no choice but to play her part in the charisma. "It's very kind of you," Elena said, her voice flat. "Nonsense," Beatrice purred, fastening the cool metal around Elena's wrist. "It suits you. but it is far too simple to be worn alone. It needs companions. She opened a velvet-lined drawer and took out a pair of matching silver drop earrings set with small dark pearls. Here, a set. Keep them safe in your room for now. We shall find the right occasion for you to wear them soon. The directive was clear. Elena accepted the small velvet pouch containing the earrings, its softness feeling like a lie. She returned to her cavernous bedroom, the weight of the jewelry in her hand feeling heavier than lead. She placed the pouch not in her new empty jewelry box, but in the bottom drawer of her writing desk, beneath a stack of her own letters from home. It felt like burying evidence. The discovery was engineered for maximum humiliation. It occurred not in the privacy of her room, but during a pre-dinner gathering in the main drawing room. A small group of neighboring gentry, close friends of Beatrice, had been invited. Elena stood by the window, a silent, nervous ornament, when Beatrice clapped her hands together lightly. "Oh, I nearly forgot," she announced to the room. "Elena, darling, would you be a dear? I left my pearl and silver earrings, the ones that match the bracelet I gave you, on my dressing table. The ones from the set. Would you fetch them for me? I think they would be perfect for tonight." A simple, reasonable request. A test. Every eye in the room turned to Elena. She felt the blood drain from her face. The set. The trap was sprung. She had no matching earrings from Beatrice, only the single pair she had been given hours earlier, still nestled in their pouch in her desk. I don't have them, Beatrice," Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. Beatrice's face arranged itself into an expression of puzzled concern. "But of course you do, my dear. I gave them to you this afternoon for safekeeping. The dark pearls and the silver settings, they are quite distinctive." She turned to her guests with a light, embarrassed laugh. "My new daughter-in-law has such a head for books, but she can be so forgetful with worldly things." "I have the bracelet," Elena insisted, holding out her wrist. "But you only gave me one pair of earrings. These." The distinction was critical, but it was already being lost in the tide of Beatrice's narrative. "The bracelet, yes," Beatrice said, her voice taking on an edge of steel. "But the matching earrings are missing from my collection, along with a diamond brooch. I had assumed, since you had the bracelet." She let the sentence hang, the implication settling over the room like a pall. The spectacle began. With a show of great reluctance, Beatrice insisted on resolving the misunderstanding at once. She led a procession, her confused guests, a smirking Clara, and a pale, rigid Elena, up the grand staircase to Elena's room. The air was thick with a prurient excitement. "I'm sure this is all a silly mistake," Beatrice said loudly for the benefit of the audience. "We'll just have a quick look." The search was a violation. Beatrice went straight to the writing desk as if guided by an invisible map. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the velvet pouch. She upended it into her palm. Out fell the single pair of silver and pearl earrings. And then, with a dramatic gasp, something else clattered onto the desktop. A glittering diamond brooch that Elena had never seen before in her life. "My brooch!" Beatrice exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest in a pantomime of shock and betrayal. She turned to Elena, her eyes wide with feigned hurt. "And only one pair of earrings? But the matching set is gone. Elena, what have you done?" The door to the bedroom opened. Alexander stood there, summoned by a quietly dispatched footman. He had arrived in the midst of the commotion, his face a mask of confusion and exhaustion. He took in the scene. His mother, theatrically distraught, the cluster of guests murmuring behind their hands, the damning jewelry glittering on the desk, and Elena, standing accused at the center of it all, her face a frozen mask of horror. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Elena saw the conflict she had hoped for, a flicker of doubt, a remnant of the man who had loved her. But it was swiftly crushed by the weight of public expectation, by the seemingly irrefutable evidence, by the whispered condemnation of his peers and the devastated performance of his mother. The betrayal was complete. It was no longer a private suspicion, but a public shaming, and Alexander, trapped by the spectacle his family had orchestrated, was now a part of it. The climax of their cruel plan had arrived, and Elena stood utterly alone at its center. The silence in the small, sparse room allotted to the senior housemaids was deeper than the quiet of the mansion's grand halls. It was a silence of shock and shame. Elena sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the same bed she had slept in months ago, before her life had been upended. She had been banished from the family wing, her status as mistress revoked as swiftly as it had been granted. The diamond brooch and the missing earrings were all the evidence the Sterlings needed. In the eyes of the household, she was a thief, a fallen woman awaiting her final dismissal. But the shock was already hardening into a cold, clear purpose. Alexander's face, a mask of conflicted anguish as he had turned away from her in that crowded room, had been the final seal on her fate. There would be no rescue from that quarter. Her only hope lay in the evidence she had already gathered and the one ally she prayed she could still trust. She thought of Sarah. Sarah had been a friendly face from the very beginning, the senior maid who had shown her the ropes when she first arrived, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor who had once slipped Elena an extra blanket during a bitter winter night. She was a fixture, trusted and respected by the staff, and crucially, she possessed a quiet integrity that Elena had always admired. In the weeks of whispers, Sarah had been one of the few who had not averted her gaze, her expression often one of thoughtful concern rather than judgment. Elena waited until the deep of night, when the house was steeped in the profound stillness of the sleeping. She moved like a ghost through the back stairways, the route still etched into her memory. She tapped lightly on Sarah's door. It opened a crack, revealing Sarah's face, pale in the moonlight, etched with worry but not surprise. "Mrs. Sterling," she whispered, the title feeling like a mockery. "Please, Sarah, it's just Elena." She slipped inside the cramped room. "I need your help. I did not steal anything." Sarah studied her face for a long moment, then gave a slow, grim nod. "I know you didn't." The words were a balm. "You know, I was dusting the landing outside Mrs. Beatrice's sitting room yesterday afternoon," Sarah said, her voice low and steady. "I saw Miss Clara leave the room. She didn't see me. A few minutes later, I saw her mother open the door and call her back in, sounding quite agitated. I heard her say, quite clearly, 'The girl has put them in her desk drawer. Make sure the brooch is with them before dinner.' I didn't understand it then. I do now." Elena's heart leapt. An eyewitness. It was more than she had dared hope for. "Sarah, they have a plan, a detailed one, to ruin me completely." She pulled the folded, now crumpled copy of the diary pages from her secret pocket, the copy Alexander had not burned, for she had made two. "This is Beatrice's handwriting. She plans to frame me for embezzlement using Alexander's business troubles." Sarah took the pages, her work-roughened fingers tracing the words. She read slowly, her lips moving slightly. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. "It's her hand, no doubt. Cold as ice, that one. Always has been." She handed the paper back. "What is your plan?" This was the moment Elena had been strategizing since her exile to the servants' quarters. "Beatrice loves a spectacle. She humiliated me publicly. We will use that against her. The annual autumn gala is in 3 days. The entire county will be there, all the people whose opinion she values most." Sarah's eyes narrowed with understanding. "You mean to confront her there? In front of everyone?" "Not a confrontation," Elena corrected, her voice gaining a strategic calm she did not feel. "A presentation. I will not shout or accuse. I will speak calmly. I will present the diary pages that outline the plan. And you?" She looked at Sarah, her gaze unwavering. "You will stand and tell the assembled guests what you saw and heard. Your word carries weight. You have no reason to lie." Sarah was silent for a long time, considering the immense risk. To defy Beatrice Sterling was to throw away a lifetime of secure employment, to make herself an enemy of the most powerful family in the region. But she looked at Elena, saw the quiet dignity that had not been broken by poverty or betrayal, and she made her choice. "They think they can do this because no one will believe you over them," Sarah said finally. "They think a maid has no voice. They're wrong. She squared her shoulders. I will be there. I will tell them what I saw. For the next 2 days, they gathered their proof with the precision of soldiers preparing for a siege. Elena rehearsed what she would say, focusing on logic and clarity, ensuring her presentation would be devastating in its calmness. Sarah confirmed the guest list and the layout of the ballroom, identifying the perfect moment, after the initial greetings, when everyone was assembled but before the dancing began, when their audience would be captive and the impact would be greatest. Their alliance was a tiny, flickering flame in the vast darkness of the Sterling mansion, but it was a flame fed by truth and a shared sense of justice. Elena's strategic thinking, honed by survival and sharpened by betrayal, was now fully engaged. She was no longer a pawn in their game. She was a player, and she was about to change the rules on the family's own grand stage. The great hall of the Sterling mansion was a symphony of opulence, a deliberate contrast to the quiet village church where Elena had been married. 1,000 candles in crystal chandeliers blazed, their light reflected in the polished marble floors and the gilded frames of ancestral portraits. The air hummed with the murmur of polished conversation, the clink of champagne flutes, and the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers. The county's elite had gathered for the autumn gala, a spectacle of wealth and social standing that Beatrice Sterling curated with ruthless precision. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her smile serene, the perfect hostess in her element. Elena stood near the grand staircase, a still figure in a simple dark blue gown she had saved from her life before. She was a ghost at the feast, an uninvited guest in her own home. The sidelong glances, the whispered comments hastily stifled behind gloved hands, were a constant prickling awareness against her skin. They all knew. The story of the thieving maid-turned-mistress had spread through the county with the speed of a brush fire. She saw Alexander across the room, standing rigidly beside his mother, his face a pale, strained mask. He was playing his part, trapped by duty and the weight of public expectation. Beatrice, sensing the peak of the evening's social energy, gently tapped a spoon against her glass. The murmur of the crowd subsided as all eyes turned toward her. "My dear friends," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hall, "thank you for sharing this wonderful evening with us. It is a time to celebrate the bonds of family and community, and the stability that comes from shared values." Her gaze swept the room, lingering for a fraction of a second on Elena, a subtle reminder of the outsider in their midst. It was the moment Elena and Sarah had planned for. As Beatrice paused for the expected applause, Elena stepped forward. The movement was calm, deliberate. The rustle of her gown in the sudden quiet was deafening. "If I may," Elena said, her voice not loud but clear and steady, cutting through the expectant silence. Every head swiveled toward her. Shock, then disdain, flickered across Beatrice's face. Clara, standing nearby, looked like a cat ready to pounce. Alexander stared, his expression one of pure dread. "Elena, don't," he said, his voice low and strained, but she ignored him. She walked to the center of the room, a space that suddenly felt like a stage. She did not look at the faces of the gawking guests. She kept her eyes fixed on Alexander, on the man she had loved, willing him to see. "Mrs. Sterling speaks of shared values," Elena began, her tone even, devoid of hysteria or accusation. It was the voice of someone presenting a logical argument, a voice of quiet dignity that commanded attention. "She speaks of family and stability. But there is another value, truth. And the truth about this family has been deliberately hidden." A ripple of astonishment went through the crowd. Beatrice's smile was frozen in place. "How dare you?" she hissed. "This is not the time for your hysterics." "This is not hysteria," Elena replied, her gaze never leaving Alexander. "This is evidence." She drew the folded diary pages from a small pocket in her gown. She held them up, not as a frantic plea, but as a document of record. "These are the words of Beatrice Sterling, copied from her own hand. They detail a plan not based on shared values but on cruelty and deception, a plan to fabricate evidence of embezzlement, to frame an innocent person for a crime, using a family's genuine business troubles as a backdrop for a calculated lie. She did not shout the damning phrases. She read them aloud with a chilling clarity. A more elegant solution is required. A significant, untraceable withdrawal. The narrative writes itself. A lesson in the cost of reaching above one's station. The crowd was utterly silent, captivated by the sheer audacity of the scene. Lies, Beatrice spat, her composure cracking. Forged nonsense from a jealous common thief. The handwriting can be verified, Elena stated calmly. But there is more than just a written plan. There is a witness to its execution. She turned her head slightly. Sarah. From the periphery of the room, where the senior staff stood in respectful attention, Sarah stepped forward. Her plain maid's uniform was a stark contrast to the silks and jewels of the guests, but she held her head high. A gasp went through the assembly. Tell them, Sarah, Elena said softly. Tell them what you saw and heard. Sarah's voice, though initially hesitant, grew stronger as she spoke. She described the scene on the landing, Clara's furtive exit, Beatrice's specific instructions about the desk drawer and the brooch. Her account was simple, factual, and utterly damning. She was a woman with no axe to grind, her integrity unimpeachable. Her testimony turned Elena's accusations from a desperate claim into an undeniable truth. The spectacle Beatrice had loved so much had been turned against her. The public forum she had chosen for Elena's humiliation was now the stage for her own downfall. The guests stared, their faces a mixture of horror and morbid fascination. The perfect facade of the Sterling family was shattered. Alexander was ashen. He looked from Elena, standing with unshakable calm amidst the wreckage, to his mother, whose face was a contorted mask of fury, to his smirking sister. The scales fell from his eyes. He saw not the paranoid wife he had dismissed, but a woman of immense courage. He saw not the dignified mother, but a manipulative, cruel schemer. The family loyalty that had blinded him snapped. He stepped forward, his movement cutting through the tension. He walked past his speechless mother and stopped before Elena. The eyes of the entire county were upon them. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion, raw and stripped of all its former privilege. I have been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I chose the comfort of a lie over the woman I love. I failed to protect you. I failed to believe you. Can you ever forgive me? It was not a grand gesture, but a profound public apology. It was an acknowledgement of his failure, and a rejection of the toxic world that had demanded it. Elena looked at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with in the garden finally returned. The forgiveness, she said, her voice soft but clear, is not the point. The truth is. Alexander turned to face the crowd, his arm instinctively moving to encircle Elena's shoulders, a united front. His voice, when he spoke again, was firm, the voice of the master of the house making a final, irrevocable judgment. Mother, Clara. The words were like ice. You have conspired to destroy an innocent woman. You have betrayed not only my wife, but the very name you claim to protect. You are no longer welcome under this roof. You will leave this house tonight. You will have no part in our lives or in the future of this family. The banishment was absolute. Beatrice stared. Her reign ended not by a shouting match, but by the quiet, devastating power of the truth she had tried to bury. She had no words. Clara's smirk had vanished, replaced by a petulant shock. As Alexander led Elena from the stunned silence of the great hall, the weight that had crushed her for months finally lifted. The reconciliation was not a return to their secret courtship. It was the beginning of something new and stronger, a partnership forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by a hard-won truth. Her dignity, which had been her only shield in poverty and her greatest weapon in wealth, had triumphed. She had not just won back her husband, she had won back herself.